So with that being said, we'll get into my backpack. And the first thing we're going to talk about is I use different kinds of packs for different things. But before you get into the pack, the number one thing going into the winter mountains is your avalanche beacon. So this, of course, is on your person, either in its holster or in one of your pockets, depending on how you carry it. But you always have an avalanche beacon with you when you're going out into the winter mountains. And then we get into the pack. This particular pack I got here is a 32 liter. It's a ski split board backcountry specific pack. But even though a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk to about is ski or split board specific, most of this stuff can be applied to any mode of travel in the mountains. Whether you're mountaineering, hiking, snowshoeing, the majority of this stuff is the same thing you're going to have regardless. There's some specific items, but most of this is pretty much what you need. And this particular pack is just a regular backpack. I also have an airbag pack, which I will show you guys a little bit later when we get into a couple other topics on the backpacks. But the way I decided to do this is I'm just going to go ahead and take this apart and talk about the equipment and why I have it here. And one of the things I found over the years is I used to be the turtle that went out into the mountains, and I just carried way too much stuff on my back. I can remember my very first big backcountry trip. It was a multi-day trip, and I was using a solid snowboard. I was on snowshoes, and I had a 75-pound pack before I even put my snowboard on it, and it was horrible. We were up in the Kness Glacier area, up above Lee Vining, and it was just a brutal hike in snowshoes with that much weight. So over the years, I've learned what I really need and what I don't need, and that's one of the things you guys can do too. Is when you go out, take stock of what you didn't use while you were out there. Obviously, all your emergency stuff needs to be in there because hopefully you never use that. But the other stuff, take a look at what you just sits in your pack every time you go out, and you can probably start crossing stuff off the list. So to start with my pack here, the first thing I got is my helmet here on top. And this particular helmet I like because it's, number one, it's lightweight, but it's also rated for rock climbing and skiing. So not a lot of helmets. I think Petzl has a couple are rated for both. And so I highly recommend that when you look into a helmet for the outdoors, especially if you're going to be skiing. If you're just climbing and mountaineering, then a rock helmet is great because most of your hazard is rock fall from above. So where a rock helmet provides you protection on the top, ski helmets also provide you protection on the sides and the back, which rock helmets do not. I mean, they're going to give you some protection, but that's not what they're rated for. And then once I get that off, I get into what I call the mud room. It's kind of a separate compartment, and this is really nice with Avalanche stuff. There's an area where you can put all your wet gear that's separate from your other stuff. And so this is where I have my shovel or probe. I already showed you the beacon. I carry a 300 centimeter probe, and I recommend that you don't carry anything shorter than 280 centimeters. We can actually rescue somebody down to about 6 feet deep. And if your probe is shorter than 280, you are going to have a really hard time probing for somebody like a 240 centimeter probe. 300 centimeter probe is almost 10 feet long. So at 6 foot depth, you've only got 4 feet of probe sticking out of the ground. When you get down to 240, you have barely anything to hang on to. And then, of course, we have our Avalanche shovel. Release this thing. And they come in multiple pieces, and you only want to use a metal shovel. Mine's probably an antique at this point. I've had it for a long time, but it still works. And so they plug together as such, and I like to have a shovel with an extendable handle, so you can spare your back. A lot of times you're shoveling on your knees when you're digging in the snow, but when you're not, it's nice to have a little bit of a longer shovel. So you want to have an extendable shovel, metal shovel. And then I carry a snow saw. And there's some stuff like if you're going out with a group, you don't all need to carry this, but if you're going to do any stability tests in the snow, if you're digging in the snow or you're going to do any stability tests, you want to have a snow saw. This is a 35 centimeter snow saw. It's pretty standard. It's not too heavy. Also, it comes with a handy beer bottle opener, which is important to have on your snow saw. And aside from doing stability tests, you can also, you can actually cut wood with this thing. But you can cut blocks of snow if you want to build a snow shelter. It's super handy for that. So it's not a general avalanche safety tool where these other two are, along with your beacon. Those are your main avalanche safety tools: beacon, shovel, and probe. But it's a handy tool, and I don't necessarily take it out all the time. If I don't plan on doing stability tests, say it's a homogeneous springtime snowpack, and my concern is wet slides later in the day, I'm just going out early, getting into the snow, getting it when it corns up and it's warmed up in the late morning to early afternoon, and then getting out of there. I don't have any reason to dig a snow pit and do a stability test, so I won't bring a snow saw with me. And then you're going to want gloves. I usually have at least 2. A lot of times I carry 3 pairs of gloves. So these are real lightweight fleece gloves. So you want to use those for your aerobic part of your activities when you're on the uphill. And then I like to do this. I actually have a carabiner with a pair of gloves I keep on the side of my pack. And the reason for that, it's really easy to get to. If my hands start getting cold, I pull these off, stuff them in my jacket, let them warm up. I don't have to take my pack off. I don't have to slow down or stop. I can keep moving and do that. So, and these are sort of a mid-weight. They're actually a pair of ice climbing gloves, which I like really because they do keep my hands warm, but I got really good dexterity with them still. And then we'll get into the top pocket on here. In the top pocket, we've got sunglasses. So you're always going to want sunglasses out there. And then not all the time, but a lot of the times I carry goggles, and I have a pair that are photochromatic because I have a hard time seeing a really flat light. So it's really nice to have something that's going to work with basically like a lighter lens. So your goggles, sunglasses, and then along with that kind of sun protection, you want to have some kind of sunscreen. And we'll give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Arc'teryx La Brea, who sponsored last week. But sunscreen you always want to have, and you want to reapply that through the day. The sun, of course, is way more intense up in the mountains and reflected by the snow. It's always good to have some ski straps. These things come in handy for anything. Even if you don't ski, you can strap boots back together. You can strap poles back together. You can strap things onto your pack. Aside from carrying them for skis themselves, I use these as basically part of my toolkit as well. So super handy. They're rubber, they're lightweight, so it's really good to have a few of those in your pack. And then we get into navigation. So for navigation, I will carry a compass and a map. And you get a compass with an inclinometer. That way you can actually measure your slope angles for your snow studies. And you want to be aware of your slope angles because anything over 30 degrees is avalanche terrain, especially that 30 to 45 degrees. So you carry one of these around, you take it out once in a while, shoot slope angles, and get familiar with what that terrain looks like. And then you got a paper map for the area that you're in. For me, this is generally backup equipment, and I'm doing most of my navigation with this guy here. Anymore because these have become such good devices. I basically have a GPS in my hand, and I use Gaia maps, but there's a lot of different maps out there that you can use to load the software in, and these work as a really good navigational tool, but they're not infallible. And so if things go bad, you got to know how to use this. And along with this, you need to have an altimeter watch because between your altitude and your compass bearings, you can pretty much pinpoint yourself on a map pretty easily. So it's really good to get that orienteering training if you don't have it and have those tools. Now, going into some of the local mountains where I go do snowpack studies and I'm in there all the time, I know that terrain in that area so well, like the back of my hand. I don't have to really worry about a map, but I'll still have my compass and I still know which way to go to get out. So if I got into a total whiteout, I could get a bearing and I'd be able to find my way back out to the road. Also, with the phone as being my main navigational tool, I carry a backup battery. So I carry this in a cord. So I've got a way, if my battery is going low on my phone, I can hook this up and charge it. And then I will carry some sort of communication device. So my phone is a communication device as long as I have cell service. But as most people know that have been up in these mountains, there's very few places you have cell service. There's a lot of other places you go. The Eastern Sierra is amazing how many times you can get a cell signal up there. But a lot of places in our mountains you can't. So I have a little satellite device, and you can set up messages in this. It works really well. It's not infallible either. But also, I can use the battery to charge this should I need to. So you want to have a form of communication to the outside world, and then a way to keep your communication devices and your navigation devices working. And then the last thing I have up here in the top is I keep a headlamp. And I carry this no matter what my plans are. Every time I go out, even if I only plan on going out for a couple hours, because things happen. And it's really good to have light. If you twist an ankle and you're a few miles in, you can still get yourself out, but it might take you several hours to do that. So it's good to have that your light and the way to be able to get out of it and see where you're going. Then we get into the main body of the pack. Open that up. And so this is something I like too that I've really become a fan of, is the back panel access on your packs, especially for those of us that are skiing or split boarding. I like to carry my boards in A-frame, which means they're up over the top, so you can't get into this top pocket. And then I also, as you noticed when I started out, my helmet's strapped over the top of this. So I would have to take my helmet off every time I wanted to get into my pack. But this way I can have gear loaded up on the pack and have a rope over the top, and I can just open up the back to get in here. And so this is one of the items that's more of a skier or split boarder specific item, is your skins. Generally, and hopefully most of the time we go out, these are on our skis, and they only go in our pack when we're going downhill. But we're in Southern California. A lot of times you might be hiking for miles before you get to the snow, especially up in the Sierras in the springtime and the summertime. So you want to have a pair of skis. You want to have some form of uphill mobility. Snowshoers would be your snowshoes. And then you're going to have layers. So I always have a puffy, and I may have a few other layers, but I'll have my puffy in the pack all the time. And then one of the things that I've done over the years is, we'll go back to my gloves real quick. So I said I usually carry 2 to 3 pairs. My fingers get really cold, even on warm days out there. So I usually carry a pair of mitts because my fingers just get really frosty. And then I wind up with the screaming barfies. And anybody that knows what those are knows what I'm talking about. It's terrible. If you don't, you can probably Google it and find some videos on it. It's not fun. But it's basically your hands get numb, and when they start to thaw out, it's really painful. So I like to have a pair of mitts. So that gives me 3 sets of gloves. And then for emergency stuff, I actually have another puffy. It can come in handy for myself. It can be in there if a partner or a friend needs it. And to go one step further, though, I've got a pair of puffy pants as well. So all this is in my day pack as emergency. And part of that package is this little bivy sack. So if something happens, say somebody breaks their leg and there's no way I'm going to get them out of there, I'm going to package them up, make them comfortable, and make sure that they can survive the night. They're not going to freeze to death. They're not going to be super comfortable. It's not going to be an enjoyable evening, but they'll survive the night, and I'm going to go out and get help. Obviously, I'll leave them with water, leave them with a headlamp, leave them with everything they need. But this stuff, it actually have a stuff sack this goes into, and these 2 items here stuff into a stuff sack slightly larger than this. It doesn't take much to put this in the pack, and it's super lightweight. So it's just insurance. It's one of those things that you don't you don't want to have to use, but it's nice to have. And on a really cold day, you can always use that extra puffy. It's handy. And then, of course, you're going to have your water, some type of water source. Here, I just got a Nalgene. Usually, I carry this and a thermos of hot tea. A lot of times, I might carry a half liter of water and a liter of hot tea. I like to have my hot beverages out there. But you want to definitely make sure you have plenty of fluids. And I'm not a big fan of bladders in the winter mountains. I've seen too many problems with them. I've actually had one when I was going up Baldy. A guy was behind me, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said there was water draining out of my backpack. My bladder had started to leak inside my backpack. Never had an Nalgene leak. Never had a plastic bottle leak. But, so I lost most of my water, and all my layers were soaking wet. So I had to just turn around. Couldn't do anything. I had a buddy of mine. We were driving to the trailhead, and his backpack was in the truck, and the mouthpiece froze and the whole tube, and we couldn't get it unfrozen. So depending on the conditions, it may take a little bit more trouble to take a water bottle out. But another one of my tricks is I have these, another one of our sponsors, 40 Below, makes these great little bottle koozies for liter bottles. I've got a half liter bottle, and you can just fit a carabiner through the sort of hinge on the sleeve. I should have brought it in here. I don't have it in here to show you. And you can just literally clip that on your belt of your backpack. And so it's right there when you're hiking. You can just keep drinking out of it. And it allows you to keep track of how much your water intake is and make sure you're actually hydrated enough. So that's really important. And then we get into a couple other things that are important is I have a toolkit that I carry in my backpack. And this varies depending on what I'm doing and who I'm with. So this particular kit here has got, I've actually got patches for clothing, got a little bit of stretchy cord, and I've got patches for if I'm camping, or I actually have a little sit pad I take sometimes. I even have a patch for like air mattresses and stuff like that. Not necessarily that I carry that all the time. I have a hose clamp. So if my ski partners have a binding brakes, I can actually strap their boot to their ski and they can get out. Carry duct tape or Gorilla Tape along with baling wire. This is that aluminum wire. It's really easy to work with. I've actually, going back to a personal experience, the older split board bindings used to have a pin that went through the front. And every time you had to transition, you popped the pin out and it was connected with a thin little piece of wire to your binding. And we were up in the top. I can't remember where I was at in the Sierras, but we were up at the top of our run. We got up there. I pulled the pin to change over from tour to ride. And it literally broke off the little wire and dropped into like 4 feet of powder. So there was no finding the pin. It was gone. And so I just took the wire, I ran it through there, tied it up really tight, and I was able to ride right down the mountain. And then I got a new pin. Zip ties. Can never have enough of those. They're super easy to use, super simple. They can come in handy for all kinds of different stuff. And then for me, I have heel risers. I've actually had these pop off of my binding, so I keep a spare one in there. I have a little bag of the different screws and nuts and stuff that go on my bindings and my boards and my pucks. It weighs nothing, takes up no room. So if I have a screw come out, and I've had that happen as well, I can put it back in. And then I keep a lighter in there. It's always good to have a lighter. If you got to start a fire, usually I have like a little baggie full of toilet paper, because Mother Nature calls in Mother Nature, and you got to take care of it. But it also works as fire starter. You get stuck out there overnight. Simple way to start a fire. And then I have this funky little like multi-tool, but it just fits in there easy. It's actually got pliers, wire cutters, Phillips, and a flathead on it, and it's super small. So when I strip down to like a really minimal pack, I can actually throw this in one of my little pockets on my waistband on my pack. And then I carry some smaller zip ties. I got the big ones, got small ones. And then I've got extra straps for my bindings that I use. And I've also got a pocket knife. I've got ratchet straps for the bindings, pretty much anything that could fail out there. And all this stuff just packs into this little pack really nice and neatly. It's easy to carry. It doesn't have much weight to it. And then there's a few other tools that I'll show you that I keep super handy as well when I'm touring. So that's my toolkit. And then the thing is this is basically specific to my gear. And we'll kind of revisit this thing when I go into talking about a guides pack. But if I'm out with a lot of skiers, I may have a few more ski-specific things. I'll also check in with my group. Like, what do you guys have? Like, not everybody needs to carry one of these if you've got a group. And one person has a pretty extensive kit that can cover everybody, then you only need one kit with the group. First aid kits, which is the next thing I'll get to, everybody should have a first aid kit because if somebody gets buried in an avalanche and they're the ones carrying the first aid kit, then you don't have a first aid kit unless you get them dug out. So you can split that up between your group and not have to carry as much weight. And then we've got first aid kit. I'm not going to get too far into this. I'll just show you a few things. One of the things I do keep in my first aid kit is a field guide to wilderness medicine. And this is from my wilderness first responder courses, which I've been a certified wilderness first responder. I think I've done 4 courses now because you have to recertify every 3 years. But this basically covers anything you can get into. It's got a nice, easy to use guide for it. So I highly recommend that you at least get wilderness first aid, but this really is kind of the standard. If you're going to be spending a lot of time outdoors, get your wilderness first responder. And then I'll carry various, I always carry gloves. If I've got to deal with anybody that's bleeding or anything like that, you want to keep yourself safe. And then I'll have various bandages. This stuff is pretty handy. It's called Set Wrap. It's super sticky. It's stretchy. It's great to wrap things up without actually restricting blood flow in that. It sticks to itself, and it doesn't really come apart when it's wet. You can buy it it's under another name at the med store, but it's way more expensive. If you go to your local, not a pet store, but like a tack and feed store, they'll carry this stuff for animals, and it's the same exact thing, but it's like half the price. And it sticks on fur, pulls right off. It, like I said, it goes through water and everything. It's super handy. And then I'll carry, of course, moleskin for blisters. I carry various bandages. I'll carry different kinds of medications, so ibuprofen, aspirin, even Pepto-Bismol. You know, people get the bubbly stomachs in the mountains, so it's nice to have something to help out with that. And then some gauze pads, some wraps. I usually keep like a bandana in there that I can actually make a sling out of. Otherwise, you start ripping people's clothes apart for things that you need. If it comes into splints and stuff like that, if your buddy's injured, you know, you can use your poles, his poles. We'll go into a little bit more about that when I go into the guide pack section of it. But there's lots of things you can use to improvise. You can use branches. You just kind of start stripping through your packs for stuff. And then I have the little inside pocket here. And inside that, I usually don't keep both of these, but I have a beanie. I'll have a sun hat. I'm usually wearing one or the other. So there, and it depends again on the weather. It may be something I don't need a beanie for. Also, I keep a buff. So you have something for a face covering, cover your neck, that type of thing. And then I can usually keep snacks right here. It's really easy to get to.
Yeah, you know, taking I took a half day off, so I'm paying for it now. But it's okay.
And then, as you can see, it's quite a bit of stuff in a pretty small pack. So it can be easily done. And then this pack, the other thing I like about it is it's got pockets on both sides of the waist belt. So
Okay.
another good place to keep snacks and stuff like that. This pocket is empty right now because I kind of reserve that for my snacks. But then on the other side, I'll keep
Is that
in here.
for the 2020?
So I keep
Okay, 24,000.
So if you're skiing or splitboarding and used skins on a warm day. Has anybody had their skins glop up with snow?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. So you want to use this before you get going in the morning, but I always keep it in my pack because if you notice it's starting to happen, you catch it early enough, this really helps. Another thing I find, if you don't catch it early enough, I keep a little scraper. I just have a piece of a scraper you use for scraping the wax off your board. But this is great when you get on a really cold powder day. Things ice up on your board, they ice up on your bindings, it could ice up on your snowshoes. You can just take this and knock stuff out. You scrape it off. Also, I was up recently this season doing a snowpack study, and it was real early season, and it got warm really fast. And I had not treated my skins, and they got loaded up with water. So I actually took my scraper and I squeegeed my skins out to get as much water out, and then I waxed the heck out of them with my wax. But so I'll keep that in there. And then for me, I run Spark Bindings, another one of our Avalanche Center sponsors, but they have special Allen head screws on the bindings. So most of your little multi-tools don't have that tool. So there's a special toolkit for that. And it comes with not only the Allen heads, or I'm sorry, they're hex heads, well, Allen heads. And then you've got flat, you've got a large screwdriver and a small screwdriver. And it's nice because the tool actually works really well. It's super solid. You pull your tool out and this just becomes the handle of it. It's pretty solid to work with. But I keep that kind of thing in my pocket where I have really easy access. And then I have a larger multi-tool. But this is in my front pocket so I can access it quickly. I've actually got down from a run, looked down at my bindings to switch over and noticed that screws were loose. And you just tighten everything up really quick. And this multi-tool is actually very heavy. I've had this since I was probably 16. We won't say how long ago that is. But they definitely have like much nicer alloys and stuff now than they had back in those days. But it's a great tool. It's solid and it's got all kinds of different stuff in it. So having a multi-tool is really handy. So I may use this. I may just use the little tiny one you guys saw in my toolkit. Again, it really depends on what I'm doing, where I'm going. So not every single one of these items is going to be in your pack all the time. And then another thing to consider are those other items that are sort of specific to the day. So like I said, not all of these are always going to be in your pack. But say it's a really cold day and you looked at the snowpack summary and you get that notice it's firm and fast conditions with the chance of a slide for life scenario. Well, then you might be throwing your ski crampons if you're a skier or a split boarder in your pack. I don't always carry these with me, but if I am anticipating really firm snow, I'll be taking these. Or if I expect that it's going to be really firm and I know it's going to soften up in the afternoon, then I may have a pair of boot crampons. So these are aluminum ski crampons that I would use for that. And if I'm taking these, then I'm also taking this. I'm going to have an ice axe with me. And so things are going to vary depending on the conditions you're dealing with. And again, going back to this pack, I like it because it actually has a great place. It's got a little pocket for your ice axe, goes through, straps into here, and then it's got another tie down right here on the front strap, or it can actually be strapped underneath this strap right here. And this pack's actually designed for 2 ice axes, so it's pretty versatile for if you're going ice climbing or mountaineering, you can carry more equipment. But so these things that I just showed you over here, the ice axe, the crampons, the ski crampons are going to be more specific to when you're going out and what the conditions are at that time. And generally, I would only bring one or the other of these. So if I'm going with a group and nobody else has ski crampons, but everybody's got boot crampons, then I'm bringing boot crampons because we're all going to take the same route and you're going to travel differently depending on what tool you're using. So that's really good to think about. And that's something to discuss, before you even meet at the trailhead. These are the kind of things, again, leading up to going out into the mountains, you're checking the weather, you're developing a idea and a hypothesis of what the conditions are going to be, and you're planning your trip according to that. And while you're doing that, this is part of what you're going to be doing, is discussing this with your group and your partners. Going back to our chat earlier about being self-sufficient, being able to take care of yourself. So it's important that you have these tools. So some of this other stuff that I showed you, the repair kit, like, it's pretty sad if you got to call search and rescue because your gear's broken and you're just going to have to walk out for a long time, when it's easy to have a few little things and be able to manage that. Same with the first aid kit. I mean, there's certainly situations where you need search and rescue, but if you have that wilderness medical training, you can decide when it's an emergency evacuation, or if you can take care of somebody and get them and manage them to get them out. Because anytime you call search and rescue, you then are exposing a whole bunch of other people to hazards and risks. So it's important to have that equipment and know how to use it. And then, of course, headlights. If you get out there and it's late, your navigation tools. There's so many people that are taken off of the mountain because they get lost. Simply because they're lost. They're not in any kind of danger other than the fact that they can't get out. And again, you're putting other people at risk. It's like, that's your responsibility to be able to know where you are, where you're going, and how to get back from where you went to. So those are really simple tools. The learning that stuff is not that hard. There's some great books on it, and you can actually implement that right outside of your house. You can just start practicing with those tools and learn how to use them. So that's pretty much what I take on a day pack if I'm going out, with my buddies. And this isn't, it's either here locally, it could be up in the Sierras. It could be a pretty big day. I may expect to be out for 14 hours on a big tour, starting before the sun comes up and coming back after it's dark. The only thing that's going to change with that is I'll have more food and I'll have more water. But other than that, this is it. If I'm going up to Kratkaw for a day to go do snowpack studies, I'm only 800 feet off the highway, but most of the stuff I'll have with me. For that, I probably don't have the baby sack and the 2 puffy layers, because I can pretty much get somebody down almost regardless. And if they're so bad that I can't get them down off the mountain, I'm probably going to need help anyways. But for the most part, like I said, this is all the stuff that I take out. So I'll kind of lay it out here in front of you to give a recap. And the only thing you're going to add to this is your hydration, your food, and your snacks. So I didn't bother. I see that on the chat right now. What about food? I don't eat. You can probably tell by how thin I am. No, I just didn't pack food into my pack. And there's definitely room with all this stuff. I could have easily gotten a couple of sandwiches or wraps in there. And then I usually do bars, goo, snacks. And in my med kit, a lot of times I'll have some type of really quick to eat sugar in case I happen to be with somebody that's diabetic. Something that's going to ingest very quickly through their gums. Like a little tube of cake frosting, especially when I'm guiding. That kind of stuff is with me because you just never know when something's going to happen. But food-wise, it's really important to pack what you're going to enjoy and pack enough for you. So while we're talking about that, generally I take more food than I can eat because I find that a lot of the people I go out with don't tend to bring enough food. And so I wind up handing food out. And again, in a guiding situation, I will have extra food because it's almost invariably somebody in the group didn't bring enough food or didn't pack enough. A lot of times these guys they're beginners and they just don't know. I've said this numerous times in posts and other stuff, is you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And then Patty said here that signal mirror. Yeah, I used to carry one of those years ago, but now that I have this thing, I don't bother with it because I can get the connection out. The signal mirror, somebody's gonna have to be able to see me. This is going to send out GPS coordinates, and they're going to be able to find me. Again, it's not that big of an item. It's easy enough to carry, something small and reflective. So if you do have a helicopter coming in, you can certainly be able to flash it up into the air and attract somebody's attention. It is hard to find people out there in the snow. So the other thing, of course, you don't want to do is wear white. And I'm a big fan of blue, but apparently I've been told by many people that blue is not that easy to see in the snow. Red's good, orange, brighter colors. So, you know, buy your gear according to that so that it actually shows up. So like, again, on a recap, you got your skins, you have multiple gloves. The other thing is gloves get wet. You're in the snow. So you definitely want to have gloves. You got ski straps, goggles, and sunglasses. Again, it's going to depend on the day and the conditions. I don't always take goggles, but I always have sunglasses because I don't like touring up with my goggles on. And then, of course, your communication. So you have a GPS, you'll have your phone, and then you'll have, for navigation, you'll also use your phone, compass, map, and an altimeter. And then you're going to have a backup battery, headlamp, sunscreen, and your Avalanche safety tools. And if you plan on doing stability tests, of course, you're going to bring a snow saw. And then, of course, your helmet. And like I showed you guys, we have first aid kit and a toolkit. And then your hydration and your food. So that pretty much covers everything that you basically need in your pack. And honestly, I don't really take anything more than this. And like I said, some of the stuff I scale back depending on what I'm doing. So transitioning from that, so you have all your basic stuff here. I'll just kind of leave it piled up here. If I'm going out to do a snowpack study, so we get into like an avalanche forecaster's pack, then a couple of things go into it. I'll probably drop one pair of gloves, and I get a waterproof pair of gloves so that I can play in the snow. My hands don't get wet. My gloves don't get wet. And these are nice. They're rubber, and they got this really nice warm fleece lining. I think if any of you were on our Avalanche field session last week, a little over a week ago, Jeff had a nice pair of these he got in Montana. I got these in Washington. The other thing I have, a lot of times when I'm doing snowpack studies, I bring a pair of binoculars because I'm looking around into the mountains. I'm trying to look for avalanches. I'm trying to look for signs of obvious signs of instability. And so I can only cover so much ground when I'm actually out there traveling by myself, but I can see a lot more. So I use binoculars. And then I'll bring a full snow study kit. And so for me, that's going to consist of a few thermometers. I'll usually have a roost block cord. You can make this just out of a piece of parachute cord, tie a bunch of knots in it, and you get one that's about, you probably want about 150 centimeters long to maybe 200 centimeters, because at 150, you'll easily be able to cut ECT column. And then I have a little paintbrush because I can go over those fine gray layers in the snowpack and identify those. Also, I have my crystal card and my loop so that I can identify different grains in the snow and crystals. And I have a measuring stick that's both in inches and centimeters. So this is a meter stick. In our snowpack, unfortunately, that's about all we need most of the time, 100 centimeters. But again, we do have times where I wish I had something longer, and I'll use my probe. Works really well for that. And I do have a larger measuring stick. And then I have my snow white book, which is where I can document pit profiles. Like this is one we did at our Avalanche training course here. So you can see what that looks like. Just quick documents of what's going on in the snowpack. You got your layers, what they look like. This is a little bit different type of notation. And that was from the 7th. of March when I was out. So you need to have some form of documentation. I've actually started documenting in the notes in my phone because I find that it's easy for me to just copy and paste from that and transpose stuff to places. And then you want a pencil. The other thing about these notebooks is they're like the Write and Rain notebook, so they're waterproof. It can be totally get wet, and you can still write with a pencil when it's wet. So that's a snow study kit. That's like a full snow study kit. And so that would go into my forecasting pack. Now, if I'm guiding, then we've got a few more things to take into consideration. And on those days that I'm worried, I'm dealing with other people and not just myself. So this is my Avalanche airbag pack, and I'm kind of leaving all this chaos up here for you guys to see, because pretty much everything you see here is still inside my guiding pack. And so this has got a big airbag compartment up here that is removable. So if I need a bigger pack, this is a 35 liter. The other one I showed you was a 32. I can pull this thing out and it pretty much turns into like a 40 to 42 liter pack, and I can do multi-day trips with this thing, no problem, and pack in more food and stuff. But for guiding, what happens is I then add some other components. So I usually have a sleep pad, and this thing packs down way smaller. And that goes along with my guides tarp. So this and this combined together becomes a shelter. It becomes a rescue sled. If I have a person with me that gets injured, they're not using their skis anymore if I got to sled them out. So I take their skis, I just take their pack apart, I pack them in all the clothing they have, I wrap them up in this thing with the skis and a pad underneath them, and I can actually create a rescue sled, and I can lower them, I can haul them, I can drag them all the way out of the mountains with that. But to do that, I have to have a harness. So I carry a ski-specific type of harness. So because you're putting it on over a bunch of puffy layers. So this thing just slips on, and it's got little clippy leg loops and stuff. It's a real flimsy harness. It's not your normal climbing harness. So you would bring that. And again, this is really going to depend on what I'm doing. If it's a day of I'm out in a really moderate, mellow terrain, and I'm not doing anything serious as far as objectives, because say it's an introduction to backcountry touring, I'm not going to need to bring all this stuff. I'm not going to ever get my clients into a position where they're going to get hurt so bad that I've got to build a shelter or drag them out. I'm usually going to be pretty close to the vehicle, pretty easy to get out of where I'm at. But if I'm on bigger missions, like really guiding a day, then I'd have this stuff. And to go along with that, I'd, of course, have to have a rope if I'm going to be doing any lowering and stuff. And with the rope, I'm going to have a few different carabiners, some slings. This is actually part of my crevasse rescue kit, which is not going to come into play down here in Southern California. But that is something, depending on the objective, that may be in my pack as well. And then with that, I would actually augment my first aid kit and add more stuff to it. And the safety kit, I would, depending on my group, I would make sure that I had equipment that would be appropriate for everybody that was in my party. So if I could be the only split boarder, and I've got a bunch of skiers with me. So then I'm going to have a bunch of gear, and it could get into drill bits and epoxy and ways to like remount bindings and stuff like that, ways to repair hard boots, that type of thing. Even these guys come handy for boot failures. My Jones boots have a BOA system for the back, so they have a walk mode where I can release it. If that's wire that's in there breaks, there's no fixing it out there. I just wrap one of these things around my leg and it closes it up. So that would be a lot of the stuff that you would see in a guide's pack. And again, it's going to be really trip specific. And then I threw this in just to remind me that I may even be bringing a stove. My little tiny stove that I use for this actually fits a stove into a little pot, and I'm able to melt snow and make water is the main reason for that, or heat water if need be. But that would be the stuff that would augment an actual day pack for recreational travel into a backcountry ski pack, or a backcountry guide pack, I'm sorry. And then there's a question on how long the rope is. This is actually a 30-meter glacier line, so it's a semi-static rope, waterproof. And honestly, you could go to something as simple as a 7 mil piece of cord, and you can lower people off of that. You're not lead climbing on it or anything, so a piece of static line, and 7 mils, much easier to carry. It's really lightweight. There's actually some great super lightweight 7 mil ropes out there now. You can take half of a double rope, but you don't really need more than 30 meters. Again, you're not pitching things out to do big climbs. You're trying to get people through sections and deal with stuff. So that's what I use this for. And that pretty much covers everything in the pack. And so that takes you through a backcountry recreation pack, forecasting pack, and a guides pack. So I'm going to kind of move the guide stuff out of the way and the forecasting stuff out of the way. And then I think we can open it up to questions. And let me see how we're doing on time. Oh yeah, we're already over time. So I got long-winded. But we can open up to questions if anybody's got any specific things they want answers about in that. And then I've got to come up with a few questions for our giveaway.
Well, so far, Alan, we have a question from Jakob. What about a crystal ball? Do you pack a crystal ball? I think, Jakob, you perhaps missed our polling about how often you're visiting the Avalanche Center. SoCal Snow is no crystal ball, but reading those bulletins does give you a heads up for what is present out there, maybe not what the future is going to hold.
I like my Magic 8-ball, actually.
Other questions, feel free to put it in the chat.
The average weight of my day pack is probably around 20 pounds or less. It's amazing, this stuff, you buy light, good gear.
If I'm going along with him, he has to carry an extra 5 pounds of food for me, since
that's the other thing.
Accustomed to Alan carrying food.
Also, if I'm guiding, because you asked my day pack, but if I'm guiding, then I start putting gear in everybody else's packs. Because when things go bad, I'm the guy that's got to still have energy at the end of the day to deal with it. Tips on super lightweight thermos flasks. So I mentioned 40 Below earlier. I would go visit them. They have what's called the Hunsdorf flask, and they make a half liter, a liter, and a 1.5 liter flask. And I don't have one right in here with me, but that's what I use. I don't use Nalgene's when I'm out in the mountains. They're super durable. They're from Germany, and it may be hard to get them right now because I've heard they've been having trouble with the supply chain. But Hunsdorf, so I think it's Hunds, Hundsfor, Dorf. Huns. Never mind. I'll look it up for you.
Do bear in mind that if you are making a summit attempt and you're counting on scooping snow high up, those anything that is thermos type does not allow the snow to melt. A Nalgene spray painted with flat black paint or some chalkboard paint does a great job. You can sling it on the outside of your pack and it'll melt that snow in no time. I'm
sorry, I misspoke. I didn't realize thermos flask. I was talking about water bottles.
Yeah, sorry, I meant thermos because I've been wanting to bring them, but they're so heavy always, right? So I'm looking for like something super, super light.
Yeah, I use my Hydro Flask. It's like 1 liter. It's not super light, but I can be 7-8 hours into a cold day and my drink is still hot. So it's worth the extra little bit of weight because that really can be soul lifting at times in the mountains.
I'll second the thermoflask. That is, I've got a number of them.
Well,
Philip asks, what else would you bring for a multi-day trip?
What else would I bring for multi-day trip? Well, obviously you're going to bring a tent, or maybe not. I've open bivvied. That was with James, so wasn't a great idea.
We've all force bivvied with James at one time or
Yes,
another.
exactly. But I've open bivvied, which, you know, if you got the right gear, it's actually really fun, especially on a nice night. For tent wise, I use the Limelight by Black Diamond. It's a 2-person tent. It's a very cozy 2-person tent, but it only weighs about 4 pounds. It's super lightweight, and it packs down. Probably the whole tent is, when it's packed up, is at least as small as this, if not a little bit smaller. And then the poles are separate. But you want to bring a tent. You're going to bring, of course, a sleeping bag. You'll bring a stove, especially if you're in the snow-covered mountains. You have to, and you got to bring plenty of fuel because depending where you're at, you generally don't have a water source. So you're going to be melting snow to make your water. So you go through a lot of fuel. But one of the nice things about that, if you're melting snow to make water, then you put that in your water bottles. You do that at night before you go to bed, and you stuff them all in your sleeping bag, and it is nice and warm and toasty. And then if you've got to dry out your boot liners and your socks, and this doesn't matter if you're skiing or not, this applies to everybody. You stuff all that stuff in your bag with you. And it's the reason why you don't want a Gore-Tex bag, because you want the moisture to escape and get out. But you'll dry all your clothing out, and then everything's nice and dry and warm, and it keeps your bottles from freezing as well. What else? Those are probably the big things: a sleeping pad, a sleeping bag, a tent, a stove, and more food, because obviously they're planning on being out there for several days.
Anything you would add to your first aid kit if you're going to go on an extended trip?
Multi-day trip, again, it depends on how many people are in the group. But there's not a lot I would add to the first aid kit. As long as I had meds, I might beef up and maybe bring a little bit more bandages and moleskin, things that I would probably use a lot of. As far as blisters go, duct tape works really well too. It's not fun when you take it off, but it certainly provides a barrier. So no,
you don't take it off till you get back to the parking lot anyway.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes not till you get home. Alan Kara asks asks for your opinion on favorite local route for a backcountry day trip if conditions are favorable.
Local backcountry day trip if the conditions are favorable. Well, if it wasn't for my ACL rehab, I'm a big fan of torturing myself. So I would go out to San Gorgonio, but that's like a 19-mile round trip. It depends on what you're looking for. You want steep terrain, good conditions, and you want to get a good solid day tour out. Baden-Powell's great, but it's really complex terrain, so it has to be treated very respectfully. Islip Saddle can be fun. The road is open to Cedar Springs. You don't have to go too much farther to get there. It's not the best skiing terrain, but it's really a beautiful hike, and it can get super windy up there. That's why it's called Windy Gap, part of the transition. But the views are awesome. On a clear day, you see all the way out to the Catalinas. You look down on the city, and you're standing on this beautiful snow-covered mountain, and then you get turns. You know, if you're just hiking, it's a fun hike. Other day tours, those are probably some of the quick go-to spots.
If somebody wants a real quick, even half day, Troop Peak just west of Baden-Powell is, you know, even in a half day, you can probably get 2 loops on it if you're going to yo-yo it. You just have to watch. The approach gully that most folks use is nice and wide and open because it's a natural avalanche path. Sometimes it's
right.
appropriate to approach it from the ridge even further west, drive past the parking area and come in from the west.
And that's also a more of a springtime tour. Otherwise, you've got miles of road to cover to get in.
Right. Unless you have a snowmobile, you're not getting in there.
Right. And even and the tip though is, and I think Kara asked that. I know she likes to bike. If you go to the road closure in the springtime, the road's usually clear except for rocks. And you just bike in with your gear and then go climb the mountain and you have a nice bike ride back out. Don't tell anybody I told you that.
Excellent tip.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Alan before he starts asking you questions?
Back to Jakub's question too about the 75-liter pack. I don't know of a specific pack. I have an old Osprey pack I used, but it doesn't seem to be super ski friendly, although I used it to go up Rainier. You know, that was a time where I actually carried a big pack. But honestly, my my Mammut pack here, I pull the airbag out of this thing, and I'll do 3 to 4 day trips with this thing, no problem, and carry all that gear that I told you about in it. And it's a 35-liter pack. I don't really like skiing with a 75-liter pack on. But that's years of like carrying way too much stuff places. So you just become really minimalist with what you take out there. On that note, I'm actually buying a Polk right now. So if anybody doesn't know what a Polk is, it's basically a sled, like looks kind of like a kiddie sled with 2 rails that come out that hook to a harness that you wear around your hips, around your waist. And it tracks through the snow. It's actually designed so it doesn't side slip in that. And you load it up with all your gear and haul that in. So if you're going towards a 75-liter pack and that much gear, Jakub, you might want to just get a Polk, depending on the terrain. You can bring more gear. You can actually bring a bigger tent. You can bring a propane heater and a 2-burner stove and steaks if you want then.
Alan, Paul asks, what about Whippet for your ski pole?
I do have a Whippet pole, and it really depends, again, on where I'm going and conditions. A Whippet is really, really great for firm, icy conditions, and so I do recommend it. I saved myself from a nasty slide on the backside of Baldy, not the backside, but Baldy West. I was out touring one day. And the one thing with split board as opposed to skis, the boots are really soft, so you don't have a lot of lateral support on your ankles. And if you're traversing on really icy slopes, it's hard to get purchase with the edge of the board, and your foot just wants to roll and it wants to just slide out of whatever little bit of purchase you get. And so I was one of those days and my ski slid out, and I literally took my Whippet and just laid it out like that. And the only bad thing is I should have dove on it this way like an ice axe, because I actually tore the acromyoclavicular tendon in my shoulder, and it was about 6 months of rehab to fix that. But Whippets they're not an ice axe, but they do help. The other side of that coin is in Europe, they call them American flags. So the Europeans don't generally use Whippets. They kind of frown on them.